People remember weddings the way they remember storms. Not every detail, not every face. But the feeling of it, the light, the noise, the way everything seemed staged for happiness, and how later, you can't stop replaying the moment the sky changed. That lakeside reception at Blue Heron Lodge was supposed to be one of the easy ones. A scenic venue, a wealthy family, a couple who smiled like they'd practiced it in a mirror, a lake so calm it looked fake, like someone had ironed the water flat and dared you to doubt it. Eli Mercer showed up early, like he always did. He parked where the staff told him, carried his rolling case over gravel, and took that slow, professional scan of the world that photographers do. He wasn't hunting for beauty, he was hunting for control. The best light, the clean angles, the spots where people would drift when they thought nobody was watching. Eli was good at reading rooms, even outdoor rooms. He could tell you who would cry first, who would drink too fast, which groomsman had already decided to make it about himself, which aunt was going to yank people into photos like a director on a deadline. He was also good at noticing things that weren't meant for him. That wasn't paranoia, it was habit. It was survival in an industry where the most important part of the day happened behind someone's shoulder. The lodge staff greeted him with the kind of politeness that feels like policy. The event coordinator, a woman named Mallory, handed him a timeline printed on thick paper, as if the paper itself could prevent chaos. Eli nodded, smiled, and slipped it into his bag. He had his own timeline in his head, based on experience. People think weddings run on schedules. Weddings run on emotions. He asked where he could stash extra gear. Mallory pointed to a small staff room off the main hall. "Keep it tucked in the corner," she said. "We'll lock the door after dinner." Eli thanked her, but he still checked the door himself. The knob turned with the soft looseness of something that had been repaired too many times. He made a note in his phone. "Staff room lock, weak. Keep essentials with me." Then he went to work. The ceremony was exactly what you'd expect from people who had money and taste. White chairs aligned like teeth. A wooden arch draped in fabric that fluttered slightly in the lake breeze. The bride, Sienna Caldwell, walked down the aisle on her father's arm and looked like she belonged in a magazine, which was probably the point. The groom, Grant Holloway, waited under the arch with his hands clasped, the posture of a man trying to look sincere without giving away too much. He had a jawline that could sell cologne. He also had eyes that didn't quite land where they should. They slid over people like he was counting exits. Eli saw it. He always saw it. But it wasn't his job to judge. His job was to capture the story they wanted, not the story he suspected. He shot the vows, the rings, the kiss, the applause, the little moments in between, the bride's laugh when the wind caught her veil, the groom's mother wiping her eyes, the way the bridesmaids leaned into each other like reeds in a current. The lake behind them sat there quietly, reflecting clouds that moved too slowly to feel real. A perfect backdrop, a perfect mirror. After the ceremony, the reception started with the polite part. Cocktail hour on the lawn. Guests with sparkling drinks, sunlight on glass, laughter that rose and fell in waves. Eli moved like a ghost among them, always present, but never centered. He was used to being invisible. Invisibility was useful. It meant people stopped acting. He caught the groom whispering to a tall man in a dark suit near the side of the lodge. The man's hands stayed in his pockets. His smile never reached his cheeks. Eli snapped a few frames from afar, the way you shoot candid moments without raising suspicion. He told himself it was normal. Weddings brought together strangers, business friends, old rivals. But he kept drifting back to that corner, as if a magnet lived there. When dinner began, the staff closed the big doors to the main hall. Candlelight took over. The air filled with food, perfume, and that faint electric tension that appears when people start drinking in earnest. Eli shot the entrances, the speeches, the toasts. The bride's father spoke like a man who'd rehearsed for weeks. He praised love and family and said something about new beginnings. The crowd clapped. Eli caught the groom's smile at the exact moment it faltered just for a heartbeat when the father mentioned trust. It was a tiny crack in a polished surface. Eli's lens saw it. Later, while the guests were distracted by a plated course and an argument about seating, Eli slipped out to the back terrace to shoot the lake at dusk. This was his secret weapon. He liked to give couples a handful of dramatic, magazine-level images in the blue hour, the kind they would frame. It made them happy. It made them recommend him. It made the job feel like art instead of just logistics. He walked down a short path toward the dock area behind the lodge. A thin line of trees separated the property from the water. The lake looked darker now, like the sky had finally admitted it was getting tired. A few small boats bobbed gently near the dock. Far out, a lone fishing light blinked. Eli adjusted his camera settings, crouched, and framed the shoreline. That's when he heard voices, not the cheerful voices of guests, not laughter, not a toast. These were low, sharp voices, controlled, angry in a careful way. Eli froze, listening. The sound came from behind the boathouse, a small structure near the dock that held paddles and life jackets and other rental equipment. The boathouse door was closed, but a side panel window was slightly open. Eli's instincts whispered one word: don't. His curiosity whispered another: look. He didn't walk straight toward it. He drifted. He pretended to check angles. He kept his camera low, as if he was just hunting for a scenic shot. As he got closer, he heard the groom's voice. Grant, no question. You said it would be clean, Grant said. You said no loose ends. A second voice answered, older, rougher. Someone used to getting their way. Loose ends are what you make them, the voice said. You want clean? Then stop creating problems. Eli's stomach tightened. This wasn't wedding stress. This wasn't a family argument about seating. This was different. This had the cadence of threat. He backed away slowly. His shoe pressed into gravel. The sound was small, but in the quiet near the water, it seemed to explode. The voices stopped. Eli held still, heart thumping. A moment passed. Then the boathouse door opened. Grant stepped out first. He looked around quickly, face blank, then smiled when he saw Eli, too fast, too polished. Hey, Grant said like they were old friends. Getting some lake shots? Eli forced a professional grin. Yeah, the light's great. Grant's gaze flicked to Eli's camera and then to Eli's hands, as if checking what he'd been holding, what he might have captured. Behind Grant, the older man emerged. He wore a lodge staff jacket, but it sat on him wrong, like a costume. He had a weathered face and hands that looked too strong for folding napkins. The older man's eyes locked on Eli for a second. Then he smiled. Beautiful night, the man said. Eli nodded. Sure is. The older man stepped closer, casually. Too casually. His voice stayed pleasant, but his tone tightened around the edges. "Make sure you get the bride's good side," he said. "People remember pictures forever." Eli's grin held, but inside he felt something cold slide under his ribs. Grant clapped Eli on the shoulder. "Don't work too hard," he said. "We'll be on the dance floor soon." Eli watched them walk back toward the lodge. Then he exhaled, slow. He told himself it was nothing. People said weird things. Weddings were pressure cookers. But he could still hear the sentence, "You said it would be clean." Eli returned to the reception and did his job. He photographed dancing. He captured the cake cutting, the first dance, the way the bride leaned her head on Grant's chest, like the world was safe. He was good at lying with pictures when the job required it. Still, he felt that itch again, the one that had nothing to do with lighting. He started paying attention. He noticed that certain staff moved differently. Not the usual hospitality rhythm, more like people on a task. He noticed the tall man in the dark suit again, drifting toward the back hallway, not the bar. He noticed the older staff man, now he caught his name tag, Russ, step outside twice, each time without any obvious reason. Eli told himself not to make a story out of it. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "How's it going? You okay?" Tessa was his girlfriend. She knew his rhythms too. She could hear stress in the way he typed. She could tell when a job felt wrong. Eli typed back, "All good. Long night. Lake shots later." He hesitated, then added, "Weird vibes though, probably just wedding drama." He didn't want to worry her. He didn't want to feel dramatic, but he also didn't want to ignore his gut. At some point, close to the end of the reception, Eli realized he was missing a memory card, not the one in his main camera. That one was safe. A backup card, the one he kept in a small pocket of his bag, labeled in his mind as emergency. He checked the pocket. Empty. His breath caught. He checked again, faster, empty. Eli's mind ran through possibilities. He could have moved it. He could have dropped it. It could be in the staff room. He could have left it in the car. He told himself it wasn't a big deal, except it was, because he remembered taking candid frames near the boathouse earlier. He remembered the groom, the older man, the feeling. If the backup card was gone, someone had been in his bag, or he had been careless in a way he never was. He told himself to calm down. He finished the final dances, captured the couple's send-off on the terrace under string lights, and packed up. The guests cheered. Sparklers burned. The bride laughed. Grant smiled again. Perfect. Eli smiled too, professional and numb. When the crowd began to thin, Eli carried his gear toward the staff room. The hallway was quieter now. Music softened behind him. He pushed the staff room door. It was open. That alone was strange because Mallory had said it would be locked after dinner. Eli stepped in. His rolling case sat where he'd left it, but his bag looked wrong. Not obviously opened, just slightly shifted like someone had moved it and tried to put it back. Eli's heart thumped. He checked the zippers. One zipper was not fully closed. He swallowed. He checked his gear quickly. Lenses, batteries, cards. The backup card was gone. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty pocket, feeling the room shrink. Then he heard footsteps in the hallway. He snapped his bag shut, grabbed it, and stepped out. Russ stood near the end of the corridor talking to another staff member. When Russ saw Eli, he lifted a hand in a friendly wave. Eli felt his face go still. He nodded and walked past, not stopping. Eli left the lodge just after midnight, his head buzzing. The parking lot was mostly empty, but not fully. A few cars remained, likely guests staying overnight. The lake lay beyond the trees, black now, reflecting nothing. Eli loaded his gear into his hatchback. He sat in the driver's seat and stared at his steering wheel, trying to decide whether he was overreacting. He could drive home, sleep, deal with it tomorrow, or he could do what his gut demanded, check the dock, check the boathouse, make sure nobody had taken anything else, make sure he hadn't left the missing card somewhere. Eli didn't call the police. Not yet. What would he say? Someone took my memory card at a wedding. The groom said something weird by the lake. It sounded thin. It sounded paranoid. But the feeling wasn't thin. It was heavy. Eli grabbed a small flashlight from his glove compartment and walked back toward the water. The path to the dock was dim, lit by a few low lights. The trees moved slightly in the wind. The night had that damp lake smell, mud and leaves. When he reached the dock area, he saw something that made him stop. A small motorboat was at the dock, its engine off. A couple of men stood near it, silhouettes in the low light. One wore a lodge jacket, Russ. The other was the tall man in the dark suit. Eli's breath turned shallow. He stayed back, partly hidden by trees, watching. The men were not fishing, they were not chatting, they were lifting something heavy from the boathouse area toward the boat. A case, a long, hard case like the kind used for equipment. Eli's mind flashed. Camera case. No, not his. Bigger, more industrial. He lifted his camera, hands trembling slightly. He took a picture. The camera shutter sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. The men froze. Russ snapped his head toward the tree line. The tall man in the suit didn't move. He simply stared into the dark as if he could see through it. Eli's blood ran cold. He turned and ran, not sprinting like an athlete, but fast enough to feel his lungs burn, fast enough to feel that primal panic that says you have become part of the story. He ran back toward the parking lot. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Fast. Eli's mind blurred. He focused on his car, on the keys in his pocket, on the idea of a locked door. He reached the lot, fumbled his keys, pressed the unlock button. Nothing. He pressed again. Nothing. The battery was dead, or the signal was jammed, or he was shaking too hard. He shoved the key into the door, the lock turned, and the door... Eli threw himself inside, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine clicked. Once. Then nothing. Eli's stomach dropped. The battery! It wasn't dead earlier. He had driven here. Eli's hands flew over the dashboard. His mind screamed. He looked up and saw Russ standing in front of his car, just beyond the hood, illuminated by the lot light. Russ was smiling. Not a friendly smile. A calm smile. A smile that said, "You ran like I expected." Russ walked closer. Eli's fingers tightened around the steering wheel until they hurt. Russ leaned down toward the windshield. "Late night," Russ said, voice soft. "You lost?" Eli swallowed. "My car won't start." Russ nodded slowly, like that was the most natural thing in the world. "That's unfortunate." Eli's brain screamed at him to stay inside, doors locked. But then he realized something else. His doors were not locked. He had slammed it, but he hadn't hit lock. He hadn't had time. His key was in the ignition. The panic had eaten his ritual. Russ reached for the handle. Eli moved instinctively and pressed the lock button. The doors clicked, locked. Russ straightened and looked at him. The tall man in the suit approached from the side, moving quietly like a shadow with bones. He stood near the passenger door. Eli's breathing became shallow, fast. Russ tapped the glass, lightly, almost polite. "You took pictures," Russ said. Eli didn't answer. Russ's eyes stayed fixed on him. "We can do this easy," he said. "You hand over the card, we walk away." Eli's throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Russ smiled wider. "Sure." The tall man leaned in slightly. His voice was lower, calmer. "You're good at capturing moments," he said, "but sometimes you capture the wrong ones." Eli's mind raced. He could hit the horn. He could call. His phone. His phone was in his bag. His bag was in the back seat. He couldn't reach it without turning away from the men. Russ sighed softly like he was disappointed. "Unlock the door," Russ said. Eli didn't move. Russ's tone sharpened by half a degree. "Unlock the door." Eli's hand went to his pocket where his spare battery pack sat. He could throw it. He could... The tall man reached down and produced something from his coat. A small device. He pointed it at Eli's car, pressed a button. The lock clicked. The doors unlocked. Eli's blood turned to ice. Russ opened the driver's door and leaned in, as if stepping into someone else's life. Eli tried to shove him away. Russ grabbed Eli's wrist with a grip like a clamp. The tall man opened the passenger door. Eli kicked, instinctive, desperate. His boot struck the tall man's shin. The tall man hissed, but didn't step back. Russ's voice stayed calm. "Don't make noise," he said. "People are sleeping." Eli's mind screamed. He tried to twist free, but Russ's grip held. The tall man reached across, grabbed Eli's bag strap, yanked it from the back seat, and ripped it open with a practiced motion. Eli watched, helpless, as the tall man's hand went into the bag and pulled out the camera. Then the tall man pulled out the memory cards. His movements were efficient, not panicked, like he'd done this before. Eli's heart hammered. "Please," he said, and he hated himself for saying it because it sounded small. Russ leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of mint. "This is easy," he murmured. "You forget what you saw. You go home. You keep your career." Eli's mouth went dry. He realized in a flash that they weren't offering him a choice. The tall man glanced toward the lodge, then toward the lake. "We're done here," the tall man said. Russ tightened his grip and yanked Eli forward. Eli fought, kicking and twisting. His shoulder slammed into the doorframe. Pain flashed white. Russ dragged him out of the car. The night air hit Eli like cold water. Eli screamed, or he tried to. Russ slapped a hand over Eli's mouth, hard. The tall man stepped behind Eli and pressed something against Eli's side. Not a knife, something blunt and cold. A warning. "Quiet," the tall man said softly, "or we change plans." Eli's eyes watered. He nodded barely. They moved him toward the trees, toward the dock. Eli tried to dig his heels into the gravel. Russ shoved him forward. The tall man stayed behind, controlling the direction. The lake air smelled like wet leaves. Eli's mind splintered into useless thoughts. Tessa, the photos, the missing card, the stupid, beautiful wedding. And then his mind latched onto one clear, sharp decision. If he was going to disappear, he needed something to remain. He needed proof. He needed a breadcrumb. As they neared the dock, Eli's hand brushed his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around a small, hard shape, a spare SD card. He kept it there sometimes, a habit, a last resort backup. He had forgotten it existed. Now, it felt like salvation. Eli pretended to stumble. Russ cursed, annoyed, and adjusted his grip. The tall man stepped closer. Eli's fingers slid the spare card deeper into his palm, hidden. They reached the dock. The small motorboat rocked gently. Russ pushed Eli down onto the boat's bench. The tall man stepped in after him. Eli's gaze flicked around desperately. There was a metal cleat on the dock, a coil of rope, an old life ring. He needed somewhere to hide the card. His eyes landed on something else, a waterproof camera case. Not the long, hard case they'd carried earlier. This was smaller, black, with a clear front panel. The kind used for water sports. It sat on the boat's floor, scuffed and dull. Eli's mind sparked. If he could get the card into that case, and if the case ended up in the lake, someone might find it. Not tonight, not soon, but eventually. The tall man sat opposite Eli and watched him like a hawk. Russ started the engine. The boat pulled away from the dock, cutting across the black water. Eli stared back at the lodge lights shrinking behind them. The last warm glow of the wedding now just dots in darkness. A few minutes into the ride, Russ glanced at the tall man. "Where?" Russ said. The tall man nodded toward a darker shore. "Old Landing," he said. Eli's chest tightened. He watched the tall man's hands. He watched Russ's posture. He tried to keep his breathing quiet. Then he did something small and desperate. He reached down slowly as if adjusting his shoe. His fingers found the waterproof camera case. The tall man's eyes sharpened. "Don't!" he warned. Eli froze, hand on the case. The tall man leaned forward and grabbed Eli's wrist again, hard. Eli's fingers loosened, but not before he slid the SD card out of his palm and into the gap between the case and its latch. It wasn't inside. Not yet, but it was close. The tall man released Eli's wrist and shoved him back. Eli swallowed hard, face blank, heart screaming. The boat reached the far shore, where a narrow, muddy landing waited, hidden by reeds. Russ cut the engine. The tall man grabbed Eli and hauled him out. Eli's shoes sank into mud. They pushed him up a small path into trees. Eli looked back once. The boat rocked gently at the shore, the waterproof camera case still visible on the floor near the bench. He prayed he hadn't imagined it. They moved deeper into the trees. The air got colder, the ground uneven. Eli stumbled and Russ shoved him, and then, just like that, the world folded. Eli didn't know if he was hit, drugged, or simply overwhelmed. He only remembered his vision narrowing, the sound of water far behind, and the sensation of the ground rising up to meet him. Then nothing. When the wedding guests woke the next morning, they didn't know any of this. They woke with headaches and glitter on their clothes and photos on their phones of dancing under string lights. They posted about the beautiful venue. They tagged the couple. They went for brunch. They laughed about the open bar. The bride's mother called the lodge and complimented the staff. Grant Holloway left early with his new wife. He smiled at the front desk. He waved at Mallory. He thanked Russ, who stood by the door as if he belonged there forever. Eli Mercer's car was still in the parking lot. His gear was gone. His wallet sat in the center console, untouched. His keys were in the cup holder, and Eli was nowhere. At first, people assumed something simple. A misunderstanding, an emergency, a drunken mistake. Then the hours passed. Then Tessa called. Then Eli's sister, June, drove to the lodge with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then the sheriff's office arrived. The investigation began with what they had: a parked car, a missing person, a venue with dozens of guests, dozens of staff, and too many moving pieces. They interviewed the bride and groom. Grant acted shocked. Sienna cried. The family demanded answers. The lodge offered cooperation. Deputies walked the dock area. They searched the boathouse. They checked nearby roads. They looked for footprints in mud, but the shoreline was messy with tracks from staff and guests. They called in a canine unit. The dog traced Eli's scent from the parking lot toward the dock, then lost it near the water. The lake swallowed everything. Divers searched near the dock, but the water was deep and dark with sediment. They found nothing obvious. No body, no gear, no clues that stuck. The case became what these cases always become, a timeline. Who saw him last, what time he left the reception, which camera he carried, whether he had enemies, whether he drank, whether he had money problems, whether he would run. Tessa insisted Eli wouldn't run. June insisted the same. Eli was steady. Eli was boring in the best way. Eli didn't vanish. The sheriff's office listened politely. Then the weeks passed. The wedding photos never got delivered. That detail became its own kind of grief. Tessa had expected to fight over edits, to argue about deadlines, to watch Eli obsess over color grading. Instead, she stared at his empty desk and found herself missing the most mundane parts of him. June went through Eli's email and found nothing suspicious. No threats, no secret plans, no goodbye. The lodge insisted their staff had seen nothing. The groom's family hired private investigators. They sniffed around and found nothing they could sell to the family as certainty. The lake kept its mouth shut. Over time, the story warped. People whispered that Eli had been having an affair, that he stole something, that he angered the wrong people, that he drowned in the lake by accident, that he was running from debt. The internet did what it always does. It turned a missing person into a puzzle and then into entertainment. Tessa stopped reading comments. June didn't. June read everything, like she could force the truth to show itself by staring hard enough. The case went cold, not officially closed, just stored. Years passed. The lodge hosted other weddings. The same dock held other boats. New couples kissed under the same string lights. And Eli Mercer's name became a quiet ghost that some staff members avoided saying out loud. Then, 5 years later, the lake gave something back. It happened during a routine dive project. Not a dramatic rescue, not a storm, not a miracle. A group of environmental divers had been contracted to clean debris near the lodge shoreline and a couple of nearby coves. The lake had become a popular spot, and popular spots collect trash like magnets. The divers worked methodically, filling mesh bags with bottles, fishing line, bent metal, and the kind of junk that drifts underwater until it becomes part of the landscape. One diver, a woman named Kendra, noticed a dark object half buried in silt near a deeper shelf, a short distance from the lodge's old dock line. At first, she thought it was a tool case. She brushed silt away with her glove. The object was a waterproof camera case, not a cheap one, a serious one, with thick rubber seals and locking clasps. It was scuffed, algae-stained, and wrapped in a thin layer of lake grime, but it was still locked. Kendra's heartbeat sped up for a reason she couldn't explain. A locked case underwater isn't common. It suggests intent. Kendra signaled to her dive partner. They carefully dislodged the case from the silt. It resisted slightly as if the lake had claimed it, then released with a slow, reluctant pull. Kendra held it up in the greenish underwater light. The case had a clear panel, clouded but still transparent. Inside, she could see the silhouette of a camera. Her mouth went dry behind her regulator. She surfaced and handed the case to the project supervisor. The supervisor, a practical man who had seen plenty of weird underwater finds, turned the case over and froze when he noticed something faint on the edge of the case. A small engraved nameplate. Not a brand, not a model number, a personal engraved plate. It read, E. Mercer. The supervisor felt his stomach tighten, because even if you didn't know Eli, the lodge did. The sheriff's office did. The town did. The supervisor called the sheriff. Within hours, the case sat on a table in an evidence room, dripping lake water onto paper towels. Deputies gathered around it like people around a campfire. The sheriff now was not the same sheriff who had opened the case years earlier. The old one had retired. The new one, Sheriff Dale Crawford, had inherited Eli Mercer's file as one more cold story in a cabinet. Crawford stared at the case and felt something shift. Cold cases are weightless until they become physical again. A locked, waterproof case makes a missing person real in a way nothing else can. Crawford called June. June answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "Did you find him?" Crawford paused, then said carefully, "We found something that belonged to him." June drove to the station with her hands shaking. Tessa came too, older now, quieter with a grief that had hardened into something like permanent weather. They sat across from Crawford in a small room while he explained what had been recovered. June stared at the case like it might speak. Tessa put a hand over her mouth. Crawford said, "It's locked. We're going to open it carefully. We'll do it by the book." June's voice came out thin. "Open it!" They opened it in front of them, but not like you open a lunchbox. They photographed it from every angle. They documented the seals. They tested the latches. They treated it like a time capsule that might shatter if you breathed wrong. A technician in gloves popped the first latch, then the second. The lid lifted with a faint suction sound. The room went very still. Inside, nestled in foam, was a camera. A professional DSLR, older model now, but still recognizable. The camera was damp on the outside, but not flooded. The case had done its job, not perfectly, time always wins somewhere, but enough. Also inside were 2 memory cards in a small plastic sleeve, and a third card, loose. June saw that loose card and felt her chest tighten, because Eli always carried spares, because Eli always had a system, and because something about a loose card feels like a message. The technician removed the cards and placed them in evidence sleeves. Crawford looked at June and Tessa. "If there's any Shingon here," he said, "it could answer questions. It could also raise more." June didn't blink. "We're past fear," she said. They sent the cards to a digital forensic lab. It felt absurd in a way. 5 years of silence, and now that we're waiting for a computer to tell them whether a man had left a trail. The lab took the cards and treated them like fragile glass. They made copies. They ran recovery scans. They checked for corruption. One of the cards was damaged. Water had seeped in enough to distort portions. Another card was mostly intact. The loose card was the cleanest of the 3. When Crawford got the initial report, he didn't read it alone. He asked June and Tessa to come back. He also asked Mallory, the old event coordinator, to come in. Mallory was no longer at Blue Heron Lodge. She had moved on, but the request brought her back like a hook in her spine. She arrived pale, eyes tired, carrying the weight of a day she had tried to forget. They gathered in the small room again. A lab tech set up a laptop. The first folder opened. Wedding. Thousands of images. Beautiful images. the ceremony, the smiles, the toasts. Crawford watched June's face as she saw Eli's work again, the artistry in it, and the grief behind it. Then the lab tech clicked into the last set of images. The timestamps were present, but Crawford didn't lean on numbers. He didn't need to. The sequence told its own story. The reception was ending. People were leaving. The images became darker, more candid, more strange. Then came photos of the lake at night. The dock, the boathouse, a boat at the dock, a man in a lodge jacket. Russ. Mallory's face tightened. "That's Russ," she whispered before she could stop herself. June's eyes snapped to her. "Who is Russ?" Mallory swallowed. "Maintenance," she said quietly. "Boats, grounds, he did everything. He was always around." The next image showed the groom, Grant, near the boathouse. The next image showed Grant talking to a tall man in a suit. Then something shifted. The images became shaky, as if Eli had been moving quickly, as if he'd been afraid. One frame captured the parking lot light, blurred, Russ's face near the camera. Another frame captured a hand reaching into Eli's bag. Then the next frames were black, as if the camera had been shoved into fabric. Crawford's jaw clenched. The lab tech paused and looked at Crawford. "There's also a video file," the tech said. June's breath caught. The tech clicked play. The video was short, dark. The sound was muffled at first like cloth over a microphone. Then there was a sharp rustling sound. A voice. Eli's voice. Not calm. Not professional. Not the voice June heard in her memories. It was low and urgent, like he was speaking through clenched teeth. "If you find this," Eli whispered, "don't trust the wedding. Don't trust the staff. The doc—" A thud. A scuffle sound. Eli's breath hitched. "You took pictures," a man's voice said. "Calm. Close. Russ." The video tilted wildly. A glimpse of gravel. A glimpse of the lake lights. Then a second voice. Lower. Smoother. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Grant's voice. Tessa made a small sound like something broke in her chest. June's hands clenched. The video ended abruptly. Silence filled the room like water. Crawford sat back slowly. "This is evidence," he said, voice steady, but his eyes were hard. "This is more than a cold case. This is an abduction." June stared at the screen, eyes burning. Mallory looked like she might vomit. Tessa whispered, "He was right there," and her voice cracked. Crawford didn't waste time. He reopened the case with a new designation. He called state investigators. He requested old files. He pulled the original witness statements. He pulled staff rosters from that wedding night. The first problem hit immediately. Russ was gone. Not missing, not dead, gone. He had left the lodge a few months after Eli disappeared, according to the lodge's records. No forwarding address, no emergency contact that helped. Grant Holloway had also disappeared from the local picture. Crawford contacted the Caldwell family. They were not thrilled to hear from law enforcement after so many years, but the video forced their hand. They provided what they could. Grant's background was complicated. He had come from elsewhere. He had been charming. He had been convincing. He had presented himself as an entrepreneur. He had been introduced to Sienna through friends. The marriage had not lasted long. Sienna divorced him quietly, within a year. The family had said nothing publicly. They had paid for silence like people pay for security systems. Crawford suspected Grant had counted on that silence. Crawford worked backward. He pulled cell tower records from that night, though the data was limited. He pulled financial transactions from Grant's known accounts. Many were closed, some were empty, a few were suspicious. He pulled the lodge's security footage. 5 years old. stored on old drives, some segments corrupted, some overwritten. But there was enough to see a pattern, a staff hallway, Russ walking, Grant talking to the tall man in the suit, the tall man entering a back door. The footage near the dock was unclear, but a few frames showed a boat moving away from the lodge shoreline late at night. Crawford brought in a forensic video specialist. They enhanced frames, not to make Hollywood miracles, but to pull what could be pulled. The boat had a registration number on the side, not readable clearly, but partially. That partial matched a boat registered to a local marina service company. The company had been contracted by Blue Heron Lodge for maintenance work. Crawford visited the marina. The manager there, an older man with tired eyes, recognized the name Russ. "He did occasional work," the manager said carefully. "Not on payroll, more like hired hands." Crawford asked for records. The manager hesitated, then admitted the records were messy. Off-the-books hires were common in the area. People wanted cash. People wanted flexibility. Crawford asked who paid Russ. The manager shrugged. He worked for whoever called him. Crawford asked who called him that night. The manager's eyes flicked away. Crawford leaned in. "This is a missing person case with a video." The manager swallowed. He gave Crawford a name, a man known in the area as a fixer, a guy who arranged security for private events, a guy who made problems disappear. Crawford took the name to state investigators. The state investigators took it to organized crime. And suddenly, a missing wedding photographer case started touching a bigger map. The map had lines, smuggling routes across the lake, cash transfers, off-book staff hires, private events used as cover for moving goods under the noise and distraction of celebration. Weddings were perfect for that. So many vehicles, so much catering traffic, so many guests who didn't know what was normal. So much noise that hides everything. Crawford had always assumed Eli disappeared because he'd been unlucky. Now he suspected Eli disappeared because he'd been too good. Eli had captured something with his camera that someone couldn't afford to let exist. Crawford's team went back to the lake with divers. If the camera case had been found near the dock shelf, it meant one of two things. Either Eli dropped it into the lake while running, or someone dropped it intentionally later, hoping it would never be recovered. But the case was still locked. That mattered. People who get rid of evidence usually don't lock it nicely. They smash it, they destroy it, they panic. Locking suggests someone thought the lock was the destruction. Someone believed water would do the rest. It had almost worked. The divers searched the area where the case had been recovered. They searched the deeper shelf. They searched around old dock pilings. They found more things. Not dramatic, not cinematic. A broken camera strap buckle, a lens cap, a cracked phone case. Small items that told one story. Eli's gear had been handled near the water. They also found something that made Crawford's team go quiet. A metal cleat at the edge of the dock had scrape marks. Old scrape marks, but visible, like a rope had been dragged hard against it, and on the underside of one dock plank, hidden from casual sight, a small strip of tape. Black tape. It held a tiny object, a memory card. June stared at the card in the evidence sleeve like she was looking at Eli's heartbeat. Crawford sent it to the lab. The card was old, but intact. When the lab pulled data from it, the folder name was not wedding. It was not organized. It was not pretty. It contained a handful of photos. Not of the bride, not of the groom. Photos of shipping labels. Photos of a long, hard case being carried behind the boathouse. Photos of the tall man's face, caught in a moment when he didn't know the camera was aimed at him. A photo of Grant with his hand on the case latch, his wedding ring visible, his expression cold. Then a final photo, a close-up of a paper written quickly, likely on the back of a receipt. It said, "If I disappear, check the boathouse. Russ, Grant, boat." June's hand shook when Crawford read it aloud. Tessa started crying, silent tears sliding down her face. Mallory looked as if she'd been punched by guilt. Eli had tried to leave a trail. He had hidden the card under the dock, like a message in a bottle taped to wood, but nobody had checked under the dock planks back then. Nobody had thought to. Crawford felt anger rise, clean and sharp. Not at the old sheriff, not at the divers, not at June. At the fact that the truth had been there, close enough to touch, and time had simply walked past it. Now, 5 years later, they had something actionable. Names, faces, evidence. They issued warrants. They tracked Russ through old employment records, tax data, a few cash withdrawals, and the kind of paper trail that criminals forget when they're busy thinking they're invisible. They found that Russ was not even Russ. It was an alias. His real name belonged to a man with a history of violence and intimidation. A man who had worked for different crews at different times. A man who disappeared whenever pressure appeared. They tracked Grant Holloway through divorce records, family financial transactions, and old travel logs. Grant had reinvented himself at least once since the wedding. New name, new job title, new city. The tall man in the suit took longer. He was a ghost in paperwork, but he was not a ghost in Eli's photos. Eli had caught him, face half-turned, eyes sharp, expression like a blade. State investigators ran the image through databases. They found a match. A man tied to a lake smuggling operation. A man who had never been convicted because witnesses stopped talking, because evidence got lost, because people in small towns know when to keep their mouths shut. Crawford felt the case tighten. Now it wasn't a mystery. Now it was a hunt. They moved quietly because loud moves spook people. They surveilled addresses. They watched patterns. They pulled traffic cameras from roads near the lake. They cross-referenced boats registered to shell companies. They interviewed old lodge staff again, but differently this time. And they didn't ask, "Did you see anything?" They asked Leo, "Did Russ ever tell you to avoid the boathouse?" They asked Yedo, "Did you ever see Grant in staff areas?" They asked Shahu, "Did you ever see a long equipment case moved at night?" A dishwasher admitted he saw a hard case carried out late, but he assumed it was sound equipment. A bartender admitted Russ told him to lock the back door early that night for security. Mallory admitted something she'd never said out loud. She admitted she had noticed Eli looking unsettled that night. She admitted she saw him walk toward the dock near the end. She admitted she saw Russ follow him, but she told herself it was nothing. Because wedding nights are chaos, and people choose the interpretation that lets them go to bed. Crawford didn't judge her in that moment. He just wrote it down. Then, as the investigation expanded, something happened that made June's skin crawl. A package arrived at her door, no return address. Inside was a printed photo, one of Eli's wedding shots, cropped and printed cheaply, like a threat. On the back, in pen, someone had written 2 words, "Let it go." June stared at it until her vision blurred. She called Crawford. Crawford's voice stayed calm, but his eyes went cold when he saw it. Because threats meant the case had teeth again, and it meant someone out there still feared what Eli had captured. They increased protection for June and Tessa, They accelerated the warrants. They moved on Russ first. They found him in a small rental house in a different county, living under a different name, working odd jobs. He opened the door like a man who had spent his life expecting that day. He didn't resist. He smiled. "Long time," he said. Crawford arrested him and read his rights. In the interrogation room, Russ leaned back like he was at a bar. He denied everything at first. Casual, bored. Crawford placed Eli's photo on the table. Russ's eyes flicked to it, then away. Crawford placed a video transcript on the table. Russ's jaw tightened. Crawford placed the memory card recovery report on the table. Russ's expression shifted. Not fear, annoyance. Like he was irritated the lake hadn't done its job. Crawford asked, "Where is Eli Mercer?" Russ shrugged. Crawford asked again. Russ smiled. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. Crawford leaned forward. "Try me." Russ's eyes stayed calm. "You want closure," he said. "But closure isn't a place. It's a decision." Crawford's hands tightened. "Where?" he repeated. Russ leaned forward slightly. "He saw something he wasn't supposed to see," he said. "He didn't just take pictures. He decided to become a hero." Crawford's voice stayed controlled. "Where is he?" Russ sighed as if bored of the repetition. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. "He's not in the lake," Russ said, "if that's what you're hoping." June would later hear those words and feel a painful surge of hope. Not in the lake. Alive, maybe. Or somewhere else. But Russ wasn't offering hope. He was offering a new kind of torture, uncertainty with a smirk. Crawford pressed him and Russ gave a sliver. He admitted a boat ride. He admitted Eli was taken off the lodge property. He admitted Eli's gear was stripped, cards removed. He admitted the camera case was thrown into the lake later after they'd checked it for anything useful. Crawford asked why it was still locked. Russ shrugged. "Because I didn't want to touch it again," he said. "Water's cleaner than people." Crawford asked where Eli was taken. Russ gave a place, not a precise address, a concept. "Old Landing," he said, "across the lake." Crawford and state investigators went back to the lake. There were multiple old landings, old docks, old shoreline pull-offs, some used by fishermen, some used by people who didn't like being seen. They checked the one that aligned with the boat route from that night. It was a muddy inlet with reeds and broken boards, a place where the lake felt less like scenery and more like a mouth. I mean, they found tracks there, old and layered, but the ground still held scars. They found a shallow rut where a boat trailer had sat repeatedly. They found cigarette butts in a small cluster, as if people had stood there and waited. And deeper into the trees, they found something that made the search team's stomachs drop. A cabin, not a cozy cabin, a rough hunting cabin, more storage than home. They forced entry. Inside, the air smelled stale like damp wood and old smoke. There were signs someone had been there. A mattress on the floor. A bucket. A torn strip of fabric. Blue like a windbreaker. A tripod leg. June saw the tripod leg in a photo later and broke down because Eli's tripod was a specific model. He complained about its weight. He'd loved its stability. The cabin didn't contain Eli, but it contained the echo of him. The investigators searched wider. They found an old storage shed nearby, half collapsed. Inside were scraps of packaging, a few empty hard cases, a coil of rope. Crawford's team collected everything. They took fingerprints, they took DNA swabs, they took whatever the place still offered. Back at the station with Russ in custody, they arrested Grant Holloway in a different state. He was living under a new name, selling high-end insurance, smiling at people like he had never stood under a wedding arch and lied. Grant was shocked when the handcuffs clicked. Then he regained his smile. In interrogation, Grant's tone was smooth, practiced. He insisted he hadn't harmed Eli. He insisted he was a victim of Russ. He insisted he had been scared. He insisted he had tried to stop it. Crawford played Eli's video audio. Grant went quiet. Crawford watched Grant's face carefully as his own voice returned from the past, cold, controlled, saying, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Grant's eyes didn't show regret. They showed calculation. Crawford realized something unpleasant. Grant didn't think Eli's life mattered. Grant thought Eli's life was an obstacle. Crawford asked where Eli was. Grant said he didn't know. Crawford asked again. Grant said, "I was trying to protect my wife." Crawford leaned forward. "Your wife divorced you," he said. "You weren't protecting her, you were protecting yourself." Grant's smile cracked slightly, then Crawford did something that shifted the room. He placed a wedding photo on the table. One Eli had taken, beautifully framed, the bride laughing, Grant's hand on her waist. Then he placed another photo beside it. Eli's hidden card photo of the hard case being carried, Grant's face in the frame. Crawford tapped it. "You used the wedding as cover," Crawford said. "You moved something across the lake during the reception. Eli caught it. You took him." Grant's jaw tightened. Crawford waited. Finally, Grant exhaled and said, "You don't understand what you're touching." Crawford didn't blink. "Tell me." Grant shook his head. "If I talk, I die." Crawford's voice went quiet. "If you don't talk, someone else stays lost." Grant's eyes flicked up. For a moment, just a thin, human moment, Grant looked almost afraid. Then he looked away. He still didn't give Eli's location, but he gave something else. He gave the name of the tall man in the suit. He gave the name of the organization behind the lake transfers. He gave the connection between the lodge's events and the security hires. Grant wanted a deal. He wanted to trade names for protection. Crawford didn't promise anything, he just wrote it down. State investigators went after the organization with the names Grant gave. They hit storage units. They hit warehouses. They hit accounts. They found stolen goods. They found financial trails. They found evidence of years of operations. The wedding was one event in a long pattern. As the net tightened, the tall man in the suit ran. He vanished like smoke. That alone told Crawford the case had reached the right nerve. They tracked him through boat registrations and cash purchases. They caught glimpses of him on security cameras near marinas. He moved like someone who had practiced disappearing. Then a break came from an unexpected place. A small town nurse called law enforcement after recognizing a face from a news segment. The nurse had been watching late-night local coverage because she couldn't sleep. And when the image of the tall man flashed, she felt her stomach twist. She had seen him, not at a wedding, not at the lodge, in a clinic, years earlier. He brought a man in with injuries and insisted on paying cash. He refused to give names. He stayed close. He watched everything. The nurse remembered the other man too, because the other man had been quiet, eyes hollow, face bruised, holding himself like someone afraid to move wrong. The nurse remembered because the other man's hands were stained with something dark, dirt maybe, or lake mud, and because the tall man kept saying, "He fell? He's clumsy?" The nurse had believed him at the time because she didn't have a reason not to. Now she did. She checked her clinic's old records and found a date, and a note. Unidentified male, treated and released. She didn't have a name, but she had a description. Lean, dark hair, a small scar above the brow. June's breath stopped when Crawford read the description to her. Because Eli had a small scar above his brow from childhood, hope surged like pain. Crawford asked the nurse where the tall man went after the clinic. The nurse remembered a vehicle, an SUV, a partial plate. She didn't have the full number, but she remembered the state because she thought it was odd. Crawford used it anyway. State investigators ran that partial through databases. They found a match tied to a rental agency. The rental agency had records. The records pointed to a cabin rental service near the lake's far side, in a cluster of old properties used for hunting and weekend escapes. Crawford's team moved fast. They raided a property in that cluster. They found nothing at first. An empty cabin, dust, old beer cans, a mattress. Then a deputy noticed scratch marks on the floor near a closet. The deputy tapped the wood. Hollow. They pried up the boards. Beneath the floor was a crawl space. Shallow, but long enough for a person to fit. In that crawl space, they found a small bundle, a jacket, a camera strap, a cracked phone charger, and a piece of paper folded and damp. It wasn't a letter, it was a list. Names, dates, boat routes, numbers that looked like package IDs, Eli's handwriting. Crawford stared at it. Eli had been held there. Eli had been documenting even in captivity, the way some people breathe even when underwater. But where was he now? They found another clue in the crawl space. A loose plank panel with fresh wear marks. Like someone had been sliding it. Crawford's team followed the crawl space to the back wall of the cabin. There was a small vent opening concealed by brush outside. A way out, a tunnel, a path. It meant Eli might have escaped, or been moved, or both. Crawford's team searched nearby woods, not expecting a body, not expecting a miracle, but because you don't ignore possible escape routes. They found footprints, old, but preserved in a muddy depression. They found a discarded water bottle. They found a torn piece of wedding wristband, the kind venues sometimes use, the kind that could have been worn by staff, or by someone held and moved through events. Then, far down the tree line, they found something that made everyone stop. A small metal box, hidden under leaves. Inside was a phone. Not Eli's phone, not the one from the pouch, a cheap burner phone. And inside that phone, one unsent message saved in drafts. It was a short message, typed slowly, with mistakes like someone's hands were shaking. June, if you ever get this, I'm alive. Don't come. They watch. I left the lake. I'm sorry. Crawford read it twice, then looked up. June stared at him, eyes wide. Tessa covered her mouth and shook. Alive. Not certainty, but enough to make the room tilt. The burner phone had no sent messages, no call logs, but it had a location tag from a cell tower. A single ping, months after Eli disappeared, far from the lake. It pointed toward a city. Crawford passed it to state investigators, who passed it to federal partners, because the case now crossed state lines and involved organized operations. And then, quietly, the hunt for Eli became something different. Not a search for a body, a search for a man who might have survived by becoming invisible. Weeks later, months later, a call came into Crawford's office from a shelter coordinator in another state. A man had been coming in at odd hours, avoiding cameras, avoiding names. But one volunteer had seen the news segment about the wedding photographer and had noticed something. The man flinched when the photo appeared on the TV. He stood very still, like he was listening for danger. The coordinator didn't want to accuse anyone falsely, but she had a feeling. Crawford flew out with a state investigator. They didn't arrive in marked vehicles. They didn't walk in like cops on a mission. They walked in like humans. The shelter coordinator led them to a corner where a man sat alone, head down, hood up, hands clasped. He looked thinner than June remembered from photos, face sharper, posture guarded. He held himself like someone who had learned not to take up space. Crawford stopped a few feet away. He said gently, "Eli." The man didn't move. Crawford said, "June's looking for you." The man's hands tightened. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were tired in a way cameras don't capture. He looked at Crawford like he expected this to be a trap. Crawford didn't rush. He didn't grab. He didn't push. He said, "We found your camera case." The man's eyes closed for a moment as if the words hurt. Then he opened them again. His voice came out hoarse, careful. "It worked," he whispered. Crawford nodded. "It did." The man swallowed and something in his face cracked. Not tears, not a dramatic collapse, just a small collapse of tension like a wall shifting. He whispered, "Is Russ dead?" Crawford shook his head. "He's in custody." The man exhaled a long breath like he'd been holding it for years. June arrived the next day under protection. When she walked into the room and saw Eli alive, she froze the way people freeze when reality finally stops being cruel. She didn't run. She didn't speak at first. She stared, blinking as if afraid he'd disappear again. Eli stood slowly. June moved closer and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, trembling. Tessa arrived after June, and the moment she saw him, she started crying. She grabbed his hand like she needed proof of bone and skin. Eli didn't say anything cinematic. He just said, "I'm sorry." And his voice broke. Later, when Eli was safe enough to talk, he told Crawford what happened. Not every detail. He didn't like revisiting it, but enough. He confirmed he had seen the transfer behind the boathouse. Stolen goods moved through the wedding noise. He confirmed Grant was involved, not as a victim, but as a participant. He confirmed Russ was enforcement. He confirmed the tall man was the real power. Eli said the reason he survived was because he did something very small in the boat. He hid a card. He said he couldn't get it inside the case in time, so he wedged it, and later, when he had a chance, when Russ and the tall man got careless, he slid it under the dock plank and taped it. He said he didn't know if anyone would find it, but he needed something to exist outside their control. The camera case, he said, was his other insurance. He said he locked it because he wanted the lake to do what humans wouldn't, protect evidence until the right moment. It almost didn't work. It worked anyway. Eli testified later under protection in a case that unfolded far beyond a missing photographer. The operation got dismantled piece by piece. Grant took a deal. Russ tried to bargain. The tall man ran until he couldn't. The lodge changed ownership within a year. The old staff scattered. The dock got rebuilt. The boathouse got repainted. But June never trusted string lights again. Tessa couldn't look at wedding photos without her stomach tightening. Eli returned to photography slowly. Not weddings at first. He shot landscapes, empty roads, quiet water, things that didn't lie back to him. One day, months after he came home, he opened his old wedding folder and stared at the images. He saw the bride laughing. He saw Grant smiling. He saw himself reflected in a glass door, invisible as always. He whispered something that only June heard when she walked past his office. He whispered, "People think cameras tell the truth." June paused. Eli didn't look up. He said, "They don't. They tell what's left behind." And for 5 years, the only thing left behind had been a locked, waterproof case, sleeping under silt in the dark, until divers pulled it into daylight and turned a missing man into a voice again. A wedding ended. A lake kept a secret. A camera case held a story shut with 2 latches. And when it finally opened, the whole town learned what Eli had learned the hard way. Celebrations are loud enough to hide almost anything. Almost.